Hey, how are you doing? I want to talk to you today about a current scandal and a not so current hoax and what both of them have to do with the church today. Let me start by telling you a personal story that goes back over 40 years, though. Back in 1981, I was on staff with what we call a gay affirming church. It was called the Metropolitan Community Church. One day, the associate pastor came to me and said, "Someone has come forward and reported something terrible. We have a man here who says he's been raped. He was raped in the men's bathroom on a Saturday afternoon. The rapist attacked him from behind, and after violating him, the rapist left this behind." And what the associate pastor showed me was an editorial that had appeared in the newspaper, which was critical of gay rights. And the associate pastor said, "This man was inspired by this article to rape this poor guy in our bathroom here in the middle of the day." And of course, I was appalled and I said, "Well, this is a terrible thing. Did he go to the police?" "No." "Okay, well, did he go to a doctor?" "Nope." "Did he go to the emergency room?" "Nope." "Has he told anyone?" "No, but he wants to testify about this in church next Sunday." And I said, "Okay, now the men's bathroom is fairly close to the backyard of the neighboring house to this church. It seems that if there had been an attack going on, this man would have screamed in pain. Have we checked with the neighbor to see if they heard anything?" "Nope." Okay, so this individual has claimed he was raped. He has claimed that the rapist was inspired by an anti gay editorial that appeared in the newspaper, and we have nothing else to go on besides that. And he wants to testify in church in front of everybody. I said, "This does not sound very authentic to me." The associate pastor said, "Who cares? People need to know what happens when people speak out against gay rights." Now, fortunately, our lead pastor, who was a good friend of mine, said, I agree with Joe. This sounds fishy. Let's not promote what might be a lie." But according to my friend who was the associate pastor, and here's the main point, the importance of the cause overrode the importance of credibility. If it would help the cause along, if a gay man could say he was raped because a conservative Christian wrote an editorial against homosexuality, who cares whether or not it really happened? It will help our cause. We will look like victims, and it'll make it look as though people who criticize homosexuality are actually inciting violence. Therefore, the importance of the cause overrode the importance of credibility. Now, let's flash forward about 42 years. Another person came forward a few years back also reporting something terrible. You ever hear of Sam Brinton? He's been in the news quite a bit lately. He's a self identified transgender. He is an activist. And about 12 years ago, he came to fame by telling a shocking story about what he endured at the hands of what is commonly called a conversion therapist. What's a conversion therapist? Well, technically, that's any pastor or counselor or therapist who offers help to someone who says, "I don't want to be gay. I don't want to give in to these feelings. Can you help me overcome them, resist them, and explore my potential for a normal response?" If you in any way help that person towards a biblical goal regarding their homosexuality, you're a conversion therapist. It's actually based on sinister images of the way some homosexuals were treated by the psychiatric community in the 1940s and the 1950s, and perhaps even into the 1960s, when it was true. Treatment for homosexuality in some cases included things like shock treatment and aversion therapy and some very odd things that nobody does and really nobody has done for quite a few years. But nonetheless, that label gets slapped very unfairly on all of us who offer this kind of counseling. Sam Brinton is someone who said that when he was a boy, he was sent to a conversion therapy camp in Florida because as a boy, he told his parents he was gay. And the story becomes nightmarish at that point. He says that he was forced to lay down on a table. Needles were put under his fingernails. Electric shocks were sent through his body when he was shown pictures of men. He was shown pornographic images of women. He was subjected to some horrendous, really medieval, torturous treatment. And because that story was so dramatic and so appalling, he became a bit of a celebrity, especially among those movements and organizations that want to pass laws against what they call conversion therapy, which again is any kind of counseling, usually Christian based, for people who want to overcome homosexuality. Well, Sam was given a platform via a number of gay rights organizations, most notably the Trevor Project, a very well known organization, particularly geared to help gay and lesbian youth. Not only was he given a platform with these organizations, he was given very wide media coverage. I mean, he told his horrendous story of what this terrible, allegedly Christian conversion therapist did to him on NBC News, USA Today, the New York Times, and Psychology Today, among other news outlets and publications. Now, Sam, as a result, had a direct influence on laws pertaining to conversion therapy because, of course, he painted such a gruesome picture of what it allegedly is that a number of people thought, well, if that's what conversion therapy is, of course we must ban it, we must make it illegal. And several nations and states, even within the US, have done so. Nations around the world have done so as well. In fact, Sam Brinton himself has testified for such bans at an international level. Just for example, he testified and gave his story before the United Nations Committee Against Torture in Switzerland. In the state of California, he testified before the California Judiciary Committee, which was at that time considering making it fraudulent to offer conversion therapy to someone if you charged for it. His testimony was used to strengthen the arguments for such a ban. Now, Sam Brinton is no fool. He is an engineer. He has received 2 master's degrees from MIT. He's got a passion for environmental causes. He eventually became, fairly recently, a Biden appointee for the Department of Energy, a very influential figure who is now in the middle of a scandal. Just last month, and it's recently come to light, in fact, you may have seen this on the news just in the last couple of weeks, he was caught on camera at 2 separate airports, one in Las Vegas, one in Minneapolis, St. Paul, literally stealing luggage from the carousel in the claim department there. He simply saw luggage that he liked, took the tags off it, and said, "I'll take it, thank you." And now he is facing charges of felony theft and grand larceny. For obvious reasons, he has been removed from his post at the Department of Energy. His credibility is taking a pretty big hit as a result. Well, now is the time for the United Nations Committee Against Torture, the California Judiciary Committee, USA Today, the New York Times, and Psychology Today to all revisit the story they promoted and ask the hard question, were we hoaxed? Well, I would argue that, of course, they were, because why? Again, the importance of the cause overrode the importance of credibility. The cause of banning conversion therapy, making the Christian position on homosexuality literally illegal to promote, that overrode the importance of the credibility of the story. And some of us thought so from the beginning. Now, back in 2020, almost 3 years ago, in February of 2020, I wrote an article for the Christian Research Journal questioning Brinton's story for a number of reasons. As I wrote in this article, which was called "What's the Problem with Conversion Therapy?" I noted that although Sam Brinton gave excruciating details of what he went through at the hands of this conversion therapist, he can never remember the name of the doctor who allegedly did this to him. He can never remember the credentials of the person who allegedly did it to him. Sometimes he says it was a doctor. Sometimes he says it was a psychologist. Sometimes he says it was simply a minister. He can't remember the location where it happened. He can't remember the name of the facility where it happened. And his story keeps changing in significant ways at different times as he's related his story. Sometimes he says it happened to him as a very young boy, sometimes as a person in his late teens. And most troubling is the fact that he seems to have no interest whatsoever in tracking down the monstrous person who did all these things to him. But the problem is not just him. Whoever heard that story should have acted on his claims as soon as they heard them. I wrote, in fact, and I quote here from my article, the California Judiciary Committee should have demanded the information necessary to prosecute the abuser, as should the New York Times and Psychology Today magazine. Well, duh. Sam was reporting horrendous behavior at the hands of a professional, which was reportable. If somebody had come to me as a counselor and told me about that information, I would have had to say, hey, this has to go straight to the authorities. I've got to take down every detail. It should have been reported. Not one of these sources should have reported on the story without saying, Sam, give me every detail you can. We are going to track this down. We must stop this person from doing this to anybody else. Well, interestingly enough, just last week, another journalist wrote exactly the same thing that I said. Well, largely the same thing that I said. Mr. Wayne Besson wrote in an article titled, Has Sam Brinton's story always been too good to be true? Regarding the torture aspect of the story, Wayne wrote, quote, if such a place existed, there was a moral imperative to rapidly identify the abusive therapist and contact the authorities to stop the atrocities. Amen. And regarding the press coverage that Sam got, Wayne also wrote, quote, in countless stories, not a single reporter from the world's top publications pressed Brinton to name their counselor. What kind of journalism is this? They could have asked, how do you remember every detail of your experience except the ones that would confirm the veracity of your story, end quote. Why is that important? Well, it's not only important, it's kind of funny. At least it's funny to me. This journalist, Wayne Besson, well, his article was brought to my attention by my good friend Ann Paulk, the Restored Hope Network, good friend of mine, who does work similar to mine. And she's very familiar with Mr. Besson for over 20 years now. He has been committed to shutting all of us down. He is a gay activist. He believes that so-called conversion therapy, which he says we're all guilty of, is a horrendous practice. It should be stopped. He is adamantly against all that we stand for and has on several occasions tried to do all he could to instigate exposés of people who do this kind of work. And sometimes he's been successful. And I must say, sometimes he's been right in doing so. But here's the point. When I'm agreeing with Wayne Besson, when Wayne Besson is agreeing with me, that's kind of like the Hatfields and the McCoys just signed a joint statement. But hey, to Wayne's credit, he recognized fraud and sloppiness when he saw it because he wrote those articles years ago. So we find out that Mr. Brinton has been at least guilty of larceny and theft, and really his credibility should be taken a nosedive. Well, are we surprised? We shouldn't be. Why should we be surprised? We as a culture teach the Sam Brintons of the world that they can be outrageous and we will applaud them. We taught Sam when we elevated him to so much prominence that he could make outrageous claims without ever being fact-checked. We taught Sam that he could behave outrageously and we would elevate him and celebrate him. Sam has appeared in numerous publications at numerous public events representing our country, dressed in drag, in makeup. He has openly promoted things that would come under the category of sexual kink. Now, this is somebody working as a government official who has had that support. And so we have also taught Sam, be as crazy as you want to be in public, say anything as outrageous as you want to say in public. We will not only let you get away with it without checking your accuracy, you will have support both of the government and the culture. What were we saying? Hey, buddy, because you are a part of this cause, which so many in the culture believe in, you are entitled. You're entitled. Well, if we taught the guy he's entitled, should we be surprised when he acts entitled, when he looks at a piece of luggage that belongs to somebody else and says, I like this, I'll take it? Why? Because I'm entitled. Okay, well, what's the takeaway in all of this? Because the fact that somebody was entitled is not exactly news to the church. It doesn't exactly sound an alarm, but it does bring up 3 points we ought to consider. One, verify before you vilify. Verify before you vilify. Because look, what Brinton did, that's an old tactic. Lie for the cause, enjoy the applause. If there's a so-called noble cause, lie for the sake of that cause, and as you do so, make yourself the victim, make yourself the survivor, make yourself the martyr, make yourself the hero, and you will enjoy the applause. Now, he's not the first person who's done this when it comes to Christian counseling for homosexuality. Back in 2013, the New Jersey Senate Health Human Services Committee held hearings on a New Jersey proposed conversion therapy ban, which again would have made it illegal to offer counseling to someone who wants to overcome homosexuality. A young woman named Brielle Goldani testified before the New Jersey Senate Health Human Services Committee that she, as a teen, was forced by her Christian parents to attend a Christian camp called True Directions, located in Ohio. And she told the committee, she testified that while she was at this Christian conversion therapy camp, she was given drugs that induced all sorts of adverse reactions. She was subjected to shock treatment. She was forced to watch pornography. She described a humiliating, horrendous experience, which the committee accepted at face value without even investigating this place to see where it was still operating and who should be held accountable for this kind of treatment of teenagers. Well, a therapist in the area named Christopher Doyle wasn't so convinced. He contacted both the Ohio Secretary of State and the Ohio Attorney General, and they verified, no such facility ever existed. Yet the New Jersey Senate Health Human Services Committee, mind you, considered a ban on so-called conversion therapy based on a testimony they didn't even verify. Lie for the cause, enjoy the applause. That's why back in 2016, not directly related to conversion therapy, a gay pastor named Jordan Brown filed a lawsuit against Whole Foods in Austin, saying that he had ordered a cake to be decorated with the words "Love Wins," and that the person at Whole Foods who made the cake also added the words "fag." And that when this poor man picked up his cake, it said "Love Wins, fag." And so he was traumatized. He did a press conference. He had pictures taken of he and his attorney and his supporters all holding him while he described what an emotional trauma that had created for him. And Whole Foods said, now, wait a minute. Number one, the baker who worked on that cake is openly gay. Number two, we have video footage showing him when he bought the cake and took it out of the store and it did not say fag on it. Well, finally, he knew he was busted. He admitted he lied and he apologized for the hoax. Well, of course, I'm glad when that kind of a lie gets exposed, but here's the problem. When a lie like that is made public at a national and even international levels, the effects of the lie continue to trickle down long after the liar has stopped lying. The lie gets set in motion. Let me give you a good example that hit home to me fairly recently. My wife Renee and I were at a birthday party among several Christians, and in that Christian group, one woman approached my wife, and my wife Renee was telling this woman what I do for a living, and that it included counseling people who want to overcome homosexuality. And the woman said to my wife, "Oh, he doesn't do that mean stuff, does he?" That mean stuff. She had heard about so-called conversion therapy. The lie had trickled down even to the Christian grassroots population, and now there were even believers who thought that people who do what I do actually are torturing people. A few years back, a film came out called Boy Erased, which was based on a true story of a young man who went to a ministry that included sort of a camp environment for people who were struggling with homosexuality and wanted to overcome it, except in his case, he wasn't forced to go there, but his parents encouraged him as a young man to go there, and he didn't particularly enjoy it. He wrote a book about it called Boy Erased. A movie starring, among others, Nicole Kidman and Russell Crowe was put out based on that movie, on that story. And in the movie, which allegedly was a true story based on fact, the movie showed that at this so-called conversion therapy camp, people who were there for treatment were beaten literally with Bibles, humiliated by their families, called faggot by a staff member as they went to the bathroom. They were held there against their will, and they were actually held underwater and nearly drowned after they had, quote unquote, allegedly sinned. Now, the person who wrote this story, the person whose life this is based on, went on record saying, none of that is true. You think everybody who saw that movie is going to hear that? Not on your life. The lies trickle down long after the liar has stopped lying. And Christian circles, even Christian leaders, are not exempt from falling for these particular lies. Back in Southern California, there was a bill being promoted that would have made it, as I mentioned earlier, illegal to offer so-called conversion therapy if you charge for it. One of the supporters of the bill, who actually wrote an editorial in favor of it, was Kevin Manoia, the chaplain of the Christian university here called Azusa Pacific. All of these people accepted these stereotypes about so-called conversion therapy without checking the facts. Now, in contrast, it's interesting to me that a gay activist who completely opposes all of us who do this kind of ministry showed a good deal of integrity in saying, wait a minute, no, we need to verify before we vilify. But that brings up a second point. Absolutely, verify before you vilify. Don't go criticizing something when you haven't checked yourself whether or not the criticism is true. But then again, if the criticism is true, vilify when it's verified. You betcha. Vilify when it's verified. Do these false claims about abuse at the hands of so-called conversion therapists, do they mean that nobody has ever been abused in the industry of offering counseling or ministry to repentant homosexuals? Oh, no. No. I know firsthand of some things that have been done under the auspices of this kind of ministry that I thought were terrible. And they should have been called out, and action should have been taken. I remember, just for example, back in the early 1990s, a particular counselor who I don't believe is doing any kind of counseling anymore was literally sexually abusing the men who came to him for counseling to overcome homosexuality. That's unthinkable. It's evil. Terrible thing. A Christian organization backed this individual. And when the press found out what this man was doing, the press interviewed the Christian organization and said, what do you have to say about this guy who's been doing this kind of counseling? All the organization would say was, well, we know the gay activists are sure after him, so we're not surprised. Oh, come on now. That is a lame thing to say in light of the fact that he had abused his clients. We should vilify when the crime is verified. When one of our own is sinning, absolutely they should be called on the carpet for that. After all, Paul openly withstood Peter when he was refusing to be seen eating with Gentiles for fear of disapproval from Jewish people. So absolutely, on the one hand, verify before vilifying, but on the other hand, vilify when it's verified. Absolutely. When one of our own is wrong, we should say so. Finally, where does that leave us as a church? It leaves us with a mandate. Defend the truth, defy the trends. Defend the truth, defy the trends. Because what does what happened tell us about the trends? Well, it reinforces what a lot of us have known for a long time and what I hope all of us will catch on to. There is a well-orchestrated, concerted attempt to silence the biblical concept of the family. That's not an overstatement. That is a fact. Check it out yourself. There is a well-orchestrated, concerted effort to silence the biblical concept of the family. Come on, do you think in any other kind of a story that the New York Times, USA Today, the NBC Evening News, or Psychology Today magazine, you think on any other kind of story they would have accepted such outrageous claims at face value? Not on your life. What does this tell us? There's only one explanation. They wanted to believe Sam's story. They wanted it to be true. That means that major cultural influencers and major cultural influences are committed to silencing the biblical definition of the family. That's the trend. So, what are we called to do? Defend the truth and defy the trends. What is the truth? We are created beings. We were created with divine intentions. The Bible spells out those intentions, and within those intentions are prohibitions against any behaviors that would take us outside those intentions, including homosexuality, which is specifically in the Bible declared to be something contrary to God's will. So Paul told the Corinthian church, 1 Corinthians 6, 9-11, don't kid yourselves. A number of different people will not inherit the kingdom of God, including those who practice homosexuality. And then he said very hopefully, such were, past tense, some of you. What do we do? Just sit around declaring that homosexuality is a sin? No, we don't just indict, we invite. We're saying, hey, such were some of us, and such could be some of you. In the past tense, you could walk away from this. That truth does no harm. It does no harm to speak the truth. Can it make people uncomfortable? Sometimes, but it does no harm. Of course, don't take my word for it. Listen to what the American Psychological Association has to say about this kind of counseling. In their practice guidelines for LGBT clients, the American Psychological Association says this: for some clients, particularly those who experience religious orientation as a more salient aspect of identity than sexual orientation, a transition to a pro-gay view is not possible. In those instances, the client may choose to prioritize his or her religious affiliation over sexual orientation and may seek accommodation as such a choice. What is the APA saying? There are cases when even we as a secular organization recognize that if somebody's religious faith is more important to them than their sexual desires, they should be allowed to pursue their religious faith, and their counseling should take a similar track to honor their particular goals. Now, when it comes to whether or not that kind of work, that kind of counseling is harmful, in another report released by the American Psychological Association, their report on sexual orientation conversion efforts, they have this to say, quote, there are people who perceive that they have been harmed through sexual orientation conversion efforts, just as other recent studies document that there are people who perceive that they have benefited from it. Research studies provide no clear indication of the prevalence of harmful outcomes among people who have undergone efforts to change their sexual orientation. Let me repeat that. Research studies provide no clear indication of the prevalence of harmful outcomes, among people who have undergone efforts to change their sexual orientation. Wow. Even the Secular Mental Health Association, the American Psychological Association, is making it plain that there is no proof that so-called conversion therapy harms anyone, despite the fact that laws are being passed against it. There's a simple truth here that we're defending, okay? God created within humanity a need for partnership, a need for reproduction, a need for family, an erotic bond that he blessed and called good. It was God who said of Adam, it is not good for man to be alone, and I have the solution in mind. He created a helper that was fit for him. Jesus referred to this when he said, know you not that he who created them from the beginning created them male and female? For this cause a man will leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, the two will become one flesh. What God has joined together, let no one set asunder. Do you know that one of the most countercultural, radical things we can do today as a church is defend those simple truths that were reiterated by Jesus himself? When you defend the truth, you defy the trends. What does that make you? Well, makes you an apologist, ever ready to give an answer. Makes you a steward of truth, rightfully dividing the word of truth. And maybe most important, you know what? It makes you a faithful disciple who is not ashamed of him or of his words. And what did he promise? Well, if you're not ashamed of me or my words, I'm not going to be ashamed of you either when you stand before my Father in judgment. And that, I would say, is a pretty darn good place to be. Well, hey, it's a pleasure talking with you. If you have not yet subscribed to this podcast, I sure wish you would. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead, hit that bell, subscribe. Let me know that you did. I'd like to thank you personally for that. If you have not yet read the book that this podcast is based on, called Christians in a Cancel Culture through Harvest House Publishing, you can get that on Amazon.com. That's written to equip believers to talk about these hot button issues. And if you'd like to support our work here at Cloudfire Ministries so we can go on providing free content, why just go to joedallas.com/giving, joedallas.com/giving, and that'll show you how you can support this ministry with your year-end gift. Well, hey, it's a pleasure being with you. Hope you're having an awesome holiday season. I will see you next Friday. We're here every Friday for Christians in a Cancel Culture. Meanwhile, let's keep in mind our job description. Paul spelled that out to Timothy. The servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle to all, apt to teach, patient, in meekness instructing those who oppose themselves, if perhaps God will grant them repentance according to the knowledge of the truth. 2 Timothy 2:24-25. Let's always keep that in mind, okay? When it comes to the truth, it is not just where you stand, it is also how you stand. Good being with you. God bless.